Hey there, and welcome to Saturday Science, my new periodic broadcast that shares some interesting scientific facts about health, weight loss, and those kind of things. And really what I'm going to be doing is sharing some of my most influential or the videos and documents and books and things like that have influenced my decision making the most. And today I'm going to be sharing a video from the Royal Institute in the United Kingdom, a presentation by Dr. Tim Spector. And you'll be hearing more from him on some of these Science Saturdays because I am really heavily influenced by the research that he's done. And while this isn't targeted towards people as far as obese people, it is targeted around general health and well-being, and that is important either before surgery but especially after surgery, because we are trying to make the effects of surgery last our lifetime. And in order to do that, we really do need to change our relationship with food. And I wanted to share this video because it's one of the shorter videos on the gut microbiome and eating. I think Tim is a great speaker. I'll have the link directly to this video down below in the comments so you can go and watch it separately if you want to. Periodically I'll stop and make a few comments about my experience, but for the most part I'll let the video play and give a little commentary here and there, and then we'll close up this my first Saturday Science broadcast. And I hope you enjoy this and find some inspiration in maybe how you'll tweak your diet moving forward to really maximize the effects of the surgery. So I'm going to go ahead and fade over to the channel and just get this playing for you.
Thank you very much. And you're getting certainly a diverse series of talks today. So we're going to look at a bit of the universe inside our own bodies, the sort of opposite of what we've been seeing before. And I want to just, before we get into that, just tell you a bit about how I got into this myself. Basically, it was at about 3,000 meters, I was doing something called ski touring in Italy, which is a strange...
Okay, ski touring in Italy and realizing that there might be an issue with your health is probably not such a bad thing. I'd take that view even if I was feeling like crap. But anyway, you just don't always have these epiphanies high in the mountains of Italy, I suppose, unless you're someone who does that. I haven't yet, but maybe I will now that I've lost some weight.
Rather silly sport where you walk up for 6 hours and you ski down for an hour, and it's very tiring. And at the last day, and I was really not feeling well, and I started falling all over the place, and I thought, oh well, this is just the end of a long week. Got to the bottom and I had double vision, and this persisted, and being a medical doctor, I realized this wasn't good news, that it was either MS, brain tumor, or some form of stroke. None of them were particularly great. And so after a very stressful few months of scans and things, it turned out I had a very small occlusion, a sort of micro stroke, if you like, of one of the vessels supplying the eye nerves. Now, my blood pressure went up, and suddenly I went from being healthy to being, like most people, slightly unhealthy with some disease, taking tablets, and wanting to help improve my health. And I thought, I'm a doctor, I've been studying obesity, genetics for 20 years, should be fairly straightforward to work out the best way to lose weight and exactly what to eat. And I was completely mistaken. Nothing could be harder, and when you went to the internet, you were faced with masses of quackery, and
I love the masses of quackery on the internet line. It's one of my favorites. I want to use it over and over again. And also note what he said about it being really difficult to find real information. And he's been studying obesity, which is one of the reasons that I got drawn to him in the first place. And we get misled by so much stuff that's out there, and it's really difficult to find the right information. And we've got to take everything with a big dose of caution as we move through.
Obsessional religious groups stating that their way was the only true path to salvation. And also even the government's own advice, the Public Health England advice about nutrition. Yes, it contains some facts which were accepted by everybody. Eat more plants and vegetables, eat a bit less of it, eat less processed foods and less sugar. But
you'll notice, so he's in the UK and in Great Britain, and he's going to be referring to how things are set up. Occasionally, I think in this video he does refer to the United States occasionally, but the guidelines between the UK and the United States, since most of the friends I have on YouTube are in the US, I think, very, very, very similar. And most likely because they've been influenced by these giant corporations out there that serve both the United States and the United Kingdom that are pushing these sort of false claims about what the right things to eat are. So you'll find a lot of similarities when he's talking about things in the UK and the US. They're almost exactly the same.
At least half of it was extremely contentious and without any evidence base, such as eat less salt, have more starchy foods, eat regularly small amounts and often rather than in short periods, have food supplements and use artificial sweeteners rather than sugar, and above all, count calories. And all of this is without any real evidence base. Some of it has actually been disproven by other randomized trials. So, and the whole idea really of the last 40 years of nutrition and telling people to count calories has been totally flawed. Even the most hardened obsessional nutritionist cannot possibly count their own calories. Even if they read all the labels and you only shop from a place that's counted it, even those have huge errors in them. So if we've been counting calories and our obesity rates have been going up threefold over the last 40 years, something's very wrong. So this was all telling me at the same time as I was working on another field from the twins that there might be something else going on. And that's something else that to explain all these discrepancies. And what this was for me, the understanding that there's a new organ in our bodies, a newly discovered organ that we call the microbiome, which is the community of microbes that live in our bodies, on our bodies. We're surrounded by it everywhere in this room, but in ourselves, 99% of them live in our lower intestines. And
so I found this absolutely fascinating, and I'm not going to try to interrupt too much because it is incredibly amazing, but we have more genetic material that isn't part of our human genome inside of us than actually make us human. And these coexisting organisms in our body have such a massive influence on our health, and we've got to pay attention to it. And that's where he's going with all of this, obviously, but there are other research studies out there and everything that just double down on this information and make it more clear. It's pretty amazing. So I just want to throw my 2 cents in on that.
And this community, which includes bacteria, fungi, viruses, and other organisms called archaea and protists, all live together, just like they do in your yogurt, in nice, happy groups. And the best way to think of them is as a new organ. And together, they have as many cells, there are many more organisms as there are cells in our own body, and they have maybe 1,000 times more genes. And each of those genes is capable of being a chemical factory that can pump out all kinds of chemicals, proteins, hormones that our body lacks. And so we can't live without them, and we've really discovered recently how important they are to all facets of our life, and particularly how it interacts with our diet. Now, no two people are the same. All of you would share 99.5% of your genes with each other, your DNA. And in fact, you can turn around to everybody in this room and say, isn't it great? We're all fifth cousins.
So one of the things there's going to be a link down below to Dr. Spector's newest book. It's called Spoonfed, and highly recommended because it's really straightforward, easy to read, references a lot of research, but the book itself is organized really, really well in busting myths about food. And I actually had a short conversation with Dr. Spector on Twitter about developing the microbiome after weight loss surgery. And, he said if you're feeding that microbiome, you are going to stay lean for years and years and years. There is a benefit to the microbiome after surgery, but only if we are treating it right, because it can definitely revert back to a microbiome that mirrors an obese person. And there is a difference between the microbiome of an obese person and a thin person. And we have an opportunity after surgery to nurse that microbiome into one that mirrors a thin person and maintain that leanness over time. For health reasons. I'm not talking about vanity here, right? I'm talking about health, and I don't care about being ultra thin or ultra fit, but I'm talking about being being off prescription meds and as much as possible, and being active and happy and those kind of things. So that's where I'm going with this. But anyway, there's going to be a link down below, Amazon link to his book Spoonfed. Highly recommended that you grab it. It's not very expensive. Download it on your Kindle or get a print copy, whatever, but go out and get that book.
Some of you might be third or fourth cousins, really close. And so we realize that actually, as a group of people, we're very similar. But if I asked you to compare your microbiomes, you wouldn't be anywhere near fifth cousins. You'd probably be like 10th or 12th cousins, because you'd only share about 25% of your microbes with each other, and all of you are going to have very individual microbes, unique microbes only to you. And so for some reason they like only you, they don't like your neighbor. And you should be privileged that they've decided to take hold in your bodies, not someone else's. Because generally these things are good. And this individuality explains why there isn't really one diet fits all. It explains why when you put identical twins on diets, as they've done here, you get different, as well as differences between the twins, you also see differences in the population of fourfold differences in how people will gain or lose weight on exactly the same food. And we've all seen that. We've all seen some people that seem to do very differently. And they say, well, I eat lettuce. And another one says, I eat masses of cake every day. And we've always said, oh, that must be genetic or metabolism or something weak. But it turns out genes don't explain much of it. And most of that can be explained by the differences in our microbes.
So how key is that, right? That it's not genetics. It's so much of our microbiome and the gut bugs that are in there and how we feed those and how diverse those gut bugs are. It's when you kind of come to that realization, you start looking at food a little bit differently. And it doesn't mean you can't eat enjoyable foods or have snacks or some cake or Thanksgiving dinners or things like that. But it's about what we do most of the time and how we're feeding that most of the time. is totally amazing. And the study he's referring to, the UK twin study, is a study that he headed up. You should look it up. There's a lot of fascinating research that came out of that, where they've comparing both identical and non-identical twins in this study, because with even identical twins being, genetic copies of one another, they are still dying of different diseases. You can have an obese identical twin and a thin identical twin, and they've found so much of why one person goes off in one direction towards obesity versus the other is tied back to that microbiome. And we really need to pay attention to that as we're moving forward after weight loss surgery.
Now, these microbes do all kinds of things. I'm not going to explain all this, but just to open the scope of what these guys can do. They can alter whether you're likely to get an allergy, and we're in an epidemic, if you haven't noticed, of food allergy at the moment in young people, whereas I didn't know anyone when I went to school who had food allergy. Now everyone's got it. And these microbes are the keys to allergy, about how our immune system recognizes threats and gets it wrong or right. They can change chemicals in the brain, making you hungrier or thirstier, or choose certain foods. Certainly in insects they can do that, decide what you want to eat. They can also alter your mood. They produce metabolites like serotonin, which are responsible for anxiety and depression, and many drugs are based on that. Then they can do all kinds of things about controlling how whether your gut is leaking or not, or all kinds of other systems of how you digest foods. So it's huge. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg, really, about discovering all the things that these guys do. Now, to summarize masses of science into one picture is tricky, but I've at a stage in life where I can do this without people telling me off. Because people say, well, what is this microbiome stuff? I've heard of it, but every study varies a bit. And is there really one microbe that is responsible for one disease? And the reality is, no, the studies do differ. They've been relatively small, but there are some consistencies. What we find in every single study where we compare people, a group of people with a disease, say it's diabetes, or it could be colitis, or food allergy, or Parkinson's, or depression, whatever it is, with another group that's super healthy, we'll always find that the group with the disease have a less diverse microbiome community. They have less species. If you count them up, there just aren't those number of plants, if you like. And so that's why I've used the analogy here of the garden. The English country garden is what you would like to have. Okay, so you guys are all super healthy. You've got English country garden type microbes, lots of different species, all interacting with each other in a fertile soil that contains both fungi, it's got microbes, and everything's feeding off each other. For any keen gardeners will know what I'm talking about, that all those nutrients are used, it's all being recycled, and it's very hard for invaders to come in and take over. Whereas the sick people, their guts look like an Arizona backyard. Okay? Bit of toxic waste, a few nasty bugs there taking over. It's very easy to transform that. And you can just visualize how the number of products, helpful products produced in an Arizona backyard are much less than in your English country garden. They're producing all kinds of aromas and chemicals and things for all the insects and the roots, and everything is far more productive. So the more you've got of these guys, the better it is. That's the main key here. Now, we did something called a citizen science project for the last few years with our American cousins, and this was people who were interested in their gut microbes, were donating, they're paying for their own research, really, and you can still do this if you join the British Gut Project. You pay a small donation, and then you give a small donation of your...
So he mentions here the British Gut Project and the American Gut Project, and how people could send in their microbiomes. Last I checked, the American Gut Project, which is a website I do recommend that you go and take a look at. I don't believe they're taking samples right now for the microbiome. They're focused mostly on research surrounding COVID. I do believe someday in the future, and I put myself on a list to potentially send in a sample and get the microbiome mapped, or my microbiome mapped. So I think you can go in, sign up on a waiting list, and get on there. And that's on the American Gut Project. And there are some paid sites out there too, where you can pay to get your microbiome analyzed. I have not done that yet. I'm considering it at some point in the future, because I really do think this is one of the keys to long-lasting health, especially after weight loss surgery. So I just want to throw that out there, that when he's talking about sending in a sample here to American Gut or British Gut Project, that I think right now those programs are suspended because of COVID.
Poo, we call it poo in the post, and you send it back to us, and we sequence it genetically in the same way we would look at your genes. We look at the microbes, and that's how we discover what all these species are. Then we put it all together, big computers, and start looking at these patterns. And this is of 11,000 people, and we can clearly show some patterns. We can clearly show differences between Americans and Brits, just based on their microbes. And we can tell differences between northerners and southerners, and of people living in the country and people in towns. Now, we can't go into individual differences in terms of microbes, but we can see those patterns. And the good news is we're not quite as unhealthy as the Americans, but I think we do pretty badly on the world scale. And the one thing that determined this summary health, gut health, if you like, which I'm calling diversity, where you want maximum diversity, the number one thing we found was not whether you were vegan, not whether you were vegetarian, not whether you're gluten-free or lactose-free or any one of these other religions, but actually just the number of different plants you ate every week. Okay? And I'm talking not just, you don't have to have, and that doesn't mean having 20 portions of kale every day. It means having different seeds, different herbs, different spices, and it's mixtures of fruits and berries and nuts and all these kind of things together, because each of those are fuel for your microbes. And that was more important than whether you said, I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, I'm healthy, I'm a paleo person, I'm whatever. Okay, so that's the key. So you can do all those other things, call yourself what you want, as long as you've got lots of variety on your plate. You don't get caught in a rut. Now, the government tells us to cut down on sugar, and they also tell us to cut down on antibiotics, and we know that antibiotics are really bad for your guts. And today they're given out like Smarties, but we know that children given antibiotics do get fatter and do have more allergies. It's very hard to avoid it because a lot of antibiotics are in our food, in our meat, particularly if it's cheap or processed meat. Emulsifiers come in all kinds of sources, and we know that emulsifiers in processed foods do also influence your microbes, make them stick together a bit, stop them working. Preservatives we know less about, but we're worried about them. But we do know that artificial sweeteners, I don't know how many people here take an artificial sweetener on the basis that it's supposed to be healthy. Anyone admit to taking any? One of you. Well, there must be more than that, but okay. Okay, so generally they're supposed to be inert, right? Not supposed to do anything. I went into a metabolic chamber and took some sucralose, which is the commonest one in the UK at the moment, and that's my, you can see my glucose went up. I was wearing a 24-hour glucose monitor, and so just having sucralose, it peaked. And this was telling me that these things are far from inert, and there are a number of studies now showing they reduce diversity and increase metabolic signals. So our whole idea of what foods are safe and non-safe needs a new thought when we start to think about our gut microbiome as a novel organ in our bodies. As part of my book, The Diet Myth, I did lots of studies, and I'd just come off a rigorous 3-day raw milk French cheese diet. You've obviously tried it yourselves. Helped down only with the help of a little bit of red wine.
So he talks about another book of his called The Diet Myth, which came out a few years before. His latest book's called Spoonfed, and I do believe that he's just released an update to The Diet Myth, but I haven't seen it available yet. But Spoonfed definitely has the most recent information out there based on the research within the last few years surrounding the gut microbiome and those sort of things. But The Diet Myth, also a really good book. I'll put a link to that down below, but I don't think it is the updated copy. I don't think it's available yet, but it should be pretty soon. So I just want to throw that out there.
And it was fantastic just eating Epoisse, Roquefort, and Brie de Meaux, which are 3 unpasteurized cheese you can easily get in the UK, because they have extra microbes. And I was trying to see if I could build up my microbes in just 3 days. I didn't, as a matter of fact, but I did enjoy very much the day 1 of the diet. Day 2, not so good. By day 3, I'd really had enough cheese for the week, I could tell you. And the next study I was going to do was to do the 10 days McDonald's challenge. Bit of a contrast there. Only eat all my meals at McDonald's, and I wasn't very looking forward to it because I wasn't not a big fan, but I do anything for science, of course. And it turned out that there was someone better qualified than me, someone who actually liked eating burgers and fast food. He was a student. He was hard up for money. He was also my son. So he ticked all those boxes. Fantastic. So Tom did this, and all his friends used to follow him into the McDonald's and take pictures of him because he was getting all this free food. And the staff knew him for those 10 days. But he came back to me after just 4 days and said, "I'm really not feeling very well. My friends say I'm going a bit grey. And I think we ought to stop now." And as a concerned parent, obviously, I was worried about his health, but said, "No way, we're going to carry on. We're going to publish this in the Sunday Times," which is exactly what we did. And when we published it after 10 days, he really was feeling even worse, and we even noticed, even in him, a drop in his academic achievements, which was something. But what was worse is he'd lost 40% of his gut microbes. So his diversity had plummeted in those 10 days.
Just by eating McDonald's for 10 days. I mean, it boggles my mind a little bit that it just goes to show how empty that food is, right? Like, and believe me, I was doing a lot of fast food. Was doing my gut no favors. And since surgery, I haven't had any. But I really haven't had the desire to. But this, after seeing the effect, and granted, this is just one person, but I have very little doubt that that's what's happening across the board. Doesn't make me want to go through there. I mean, you're literally killing off this beneficial part of your body, this new organ essentially of the microbiome, and we're killing it off through these low fiber, highly processed foods. Not good.
And really, we had to ask the reason why that was, because the traditional view of junk food, if you like, it's just lots of fat and lots of sugar. It's a very sort of naive idea, and maybe chemicals. That's why you shouldn't have it. But from a gut microbe point of view, what happens when you have that kind of diet, you're not getting any fiber at all. They need fiber to live. okay? The only fiber is a little green gherkin that the most kids throw away anyway. So he had 10 days with virtually no fiber and lots of fat and lots of sugar, and I think it's that imbalance that really messed up the gut microbes, messed up his gut health. And that's why we just need to think differently about this. That's where it's the lack of something rather than necessarily this idea that these things are all toxic. We need to be thinking of, because microbes are good. The more you've got, the healthier you are, the better you are. If we destroy them other ways, then we're in real trouble. Now, he stayed bad actually for several years, as he kept reminding me when he wanted more money. But I think we may have finally sorted him out now. Now,
he mentions that it took several years. In another broadcast, I think in his book, he said it took 3 years to rebuild his microbiome after just 10 days of eating only at McDonald's. So in 10 days, he basically decimated his beneficial, 40% of his beneficial gut bugs. It took 3 years to increase that diversity back. So after surgery, from what I've read, there is a little bit of a sort of a reset in that microbiome. We get a chance to build it, but it doesn't happen overnight. We have to keep at this for the long term to really build up those beneficial microbiota in our gut. So it's not an instant thing. It has to be a long-term change in the relationship we have with food, but I really think it is vitally important.
That's just an N of 1 study, obviously, and an anecdote. In our twins that we follow, half identical, half non-identical, we followed a group between 30 and 80, 3,000 of them, that we had very close measurements over, because this is the most detailed study of twins in the world that we run, and we have every few years they come in for a test and a body composition scan, and we saw that over that time, as usual in middle age, most people gain weight. Very unusual not to. And those that had high fiber lost less weight, and particularly weight around the gut, the internal visceral fat, than those that had on low fiber diets. And each extra gram of fiber people ate reduced their weight gain by 2 kilograms. So even a tiny amount of change in fiber seems to have a very big effect. And this was related to their microbial diversity. So we could directly link what they were doing with how it was changing the microbes. So we seem to now have a better understanding of why fiber is good for you. It's not the old days of, oh, it's just roughage, it just passes straight through you and gets rid of toxins, which I was taught, a very physical presence of it as a substance that just, cleared, scouring out the inside of it and cleared everything out. Now there's a real metabolic understanding that this stuff is there fueling your microbes. We also looked at the genetics of this, because in our twin study, virtually everything we look at turns out to be genetic, except whether you like Mr. Bean or what football team you support. This turned out to be a bit of an exception. It's not very genetic at all. It's about 10% or so heritable. Some microbes are genetic, but the vast majority seem to just go with the environment you live in and in your diet. And that was important for us because it suddenly realized the potential to change your microbiome is much greater than to change your genes. Now, the other thing we looked at was pairs of identical twins. Remember, these are genetic clones, where one was much bigger than the other one. And you can't explain that in terms of their upbringing, because they lived together till the age of 18, generally, and you can't explain it in terms of their genes, because they're identical in every cell in their body. So this particular pair differed by about 15 to 20 kilograms over most of their adult life. And when we added up these pairs, we found that in nearly all cases, the skinny one had more diverse microbes and had particular microbes that liked them and not their sister. And there are a couple of these that are called Christensenella and Akkermansia that we only found in the skinny twin. And when we looked, about 10% of people have this Christensenella microbe, and the people that have it in high numbers always tend to be on the skinny side. And some people reported they could eat whatever they liked, snacking on things. They never got fat. Aren't they lucky? And when we took these microbes from the twins and put them into mice, we could stop them getting fatter. Now, that shows you that it isn't just an association due to being skinny or being fat, but actually it's part of the causal pathway. And this is the clever thing about gut microbes is you can do the experiments in humans, but you won't know whether it's cause or effect, and then you can take those microbes, transplant them into these animals and make them fat, make them thin, make them depressed, make them anxious, do all kinds of stuff to them, change their immune systems. And this is why we know that they're so important and not just bystanders in what's going on. So this is really important. And there are companies now trying to experiment with these microbes, putting them into breakfast cereals and things so everyone can eat as much as they like and stay thin. They haven't succeeded yet, though. That's how to do badly. How can you improve your microbes, I guess is the other question. And I don't know if any of you listened to the food program on Radio 4. So I went with Dan Saladino to Tanzania, and an anthropologist called Jeff Leach, who's been studying the Hadza, who are a tribe that have been in this part of Tanzania for about 10,000 years, possibly 50,000 years, in exactly the same way of life. So they're one of the last hunter-gatherers on the planet, and they have 30 or 40% more microbes than we have, even the healthier stuff. And they don't get chronic diseases, they don't get fat, they don't get diabetes, they don't get heart disease, they don't get cancer. They do fall out of trees and have other injuries and infections, etc., but they don't have any of the sort of allergies or disease we have. So we think it's their way of life, we think it's their microbes. And I went there for 4 days to live with them, eat their meat, and basically ate what they did. No washing facilities, obviously, in the middle of nowhere. And as well as a fascinating time, I did manage to improve my microbes by about 20% or so in terms of diversity. But this was only a short-lived effect. As soon as I got back on the aeroplane home and started eating aeroplane food, I think everything dropped back to where it was. So I need to stay there a bit longer or keep going back there for a top-up. But it does show that by changing diets and environment, you can actually improve to some extent your microbiome. A bit about what the foods are good and bad for your gut microbes. Everyone knows green vegetables are good, high in fiber, and there are certain fibers that are better than others. And the fibers, well, at least we've studied them more. And so the ones we've studied is something called inulin, which is in, particularly in vegetables such as artichokes, both globe artichokes and Jerusalem artichokes, also known as fartichokes, that will have masses of inulin which the microbes break down and convert into very helpful things called short-chain fatty acids. So they're converting this as as I said, they're chemical factories, converting the chemicals in the plants you eat into other useful substances. So knowing which ones these are, onions, garlic, leeks, all have very high amounts of these in it. And also we know the legumes are useful. And then we have things that also have lesser amounts of fiber but have other things that are important. So in the past we've been told that drinking coffee is bad for you, peanuts are bad for you, red wine's bad for you, olive oil's bad for you. But it turns out that all these things and dark chocolate bad for you. It turns out the recent evidence is that it's all good for you. So, okay? But the reason it's all good for you is not just we got it all wrong before, it's because they all have a chemical component in them that the microbes use, and that's called polyphenols. Okay, so polyphenols have been around. They used to be called antioxidants, which was just a general way of scientists and doctors pretending they knew what they were talking about. Because no one really understands why these things were helpful. It was just a general word for things that mop up nasty things. But this is a much better theory because these polyphenols we can't actually use ourselves, but for the microbes it's rocket fuel. They love polyphenols. They break down, they get these polyphenols, they use them as energy sources, and they then convert that into other helpful chemicals for the lining of our gut and our immune system. So it's a sort of a good deal, basically, we get. And that's why
I like the fact that coffee is listed as one of his rocket fuels. Not so much, I don't think, for the stimulants, but for the effect on the microbiome, but always helpful to have coffee listed there as a good thing, at least for me. I do enjoy my coffee, and I did go decaffeinated for quite some time, but I do enjoy regular coffee now. I've never really had much of an effect. Caffeine's never had much of an effect on me. And has been perfectly fine, but I'm glad it's on this list.
The Mediterranean diet is particularly good for you because of all these polyphenols, despite the saturated fat that traditionally we're told to avoid. And then we've got a few other things in here. So you can see some yogurt there. How many people here have yogurt every day? Wow, look at you, you're like a commercial. How many people here have kefir? Okay, who hasn't heard of kefir? Okay, kefir is the new super yogurt. Okay, you will have heard, now you've heard about it, but you'll start seeing it now. When I wrote, it's interesting, when my book first came out a couple of years ago, no one had heard of kefir, and suddenly it's, certainly where I live in Islington, it's in every shop. You can't move for bloody kefir. It's like sort of, but basically it's sour fermented milk, and it has about 5 times more microbes than the equivalent amount of yogurt. So do get used to it. If you like yogurt, mix it up, and start having that as a top-up if you want your microbes. How many people here have kombucha? Well, I've got you there. Okay, kombucha is the next level. You see, once you've mastered kefir, you go to kombucha, which is fermented tea. So basically, you get and it comes from Russia, and it's very big in California, but it's taken ages to get here. But it's a fantastic drink, and it has about 2 or 3 times more microbes even than kefir. And you have fungi in there, but 3 times the fungi. Basically, you grow this mold thing that's called a mother. It's a bit like a sourdough mother, and you put it in your tea, and after 10 days, it converts the sugary tea into a really refreshing drink that has a slight sour acetic acid taste. It's packed with good stuff.
Gotta say, not a huge fan of kombucha. Some of it has to do with it's usually pretty bubbly, and post-weight loss surgery, that can be a bit of an issue with, I already burp all the time, so kombucha a little bit. I have tried it. I actually like some of the ones that I've tried. It's just I don't seem to stomach it very well. So I have to stick with yogurt and kefir and some other fermented foods like kombucha and not kombucha, sauerkraut and kimchi are some other options out there that are pretty good.
Okay, so we're diverging slightly. I could do the whole kombucha talk, but just to show you that these interesting foods all have this common theme. They're all really good for your gut microbes, either as fuel or as providing actual microbes themselves, okay, these probiotics. Meat eaters. How many vegetarians in the audience? Not many. Okay. That's probably generational. Now it's about 1 in 6 of the population is vegetarian. Less are vegan, but a lot of people have given up meat because they say it's bad for you, it's bad for the planet. They're partly correct, and most of the studies do show a slight harm of red meat over not eating meat, but it's mainly processed meat that's particularly bad. But some people may be able to eat meat fine. It turns out your microbes can determine whether you're someone who processes meat in a healthy way or you produce waste products that give you heart disease. And so they've done a number of studies now that show that this just subtle difference in how our microbes break down some of the carnitine in meat to other chemicals makes a big difference. And likely many other examples of this what we call personalized nutrition. This was just to show you, there was a headline a few weeks ago that probiotics don't work. Remember that? No. Well, the idea that eating yogurt doesn't work because all the microbes get destroyed. Turns out that's partly true. Most of the microbes get destroyed, but if you have 1 billion of them, there'll always be 100,000 or so that will get through and replicate. But they don't hang around in your gut. Basically, they're there to act as chemical signals for the others. They stimulate all the other microbes, and you get a big metabolic difference. So when we start measuring not the microbes, but the chemicals they produce, we see big differences between yogurt eaters and non-yogurt eaters. And those same micrometabolites they produce, the chemicals, we've shown are actually good at reducing some of the internal fat using our twin study. So it's just another way of looking at it. Thinking of them as chemical factories makes you understand a bit more why you're going through all this, and why so many of you are eating your yogurt, because you obviously think it's good, despite the government telling you it's got fat in and you should avoid it. You should always have the full fat one, by the way, not the low fat one if you want to get most of the benefits. Now, just closing up, there was a study a couple of years ago. Have you heard of glycemic index of food? So this is on packets where they tell you this is what the carbohydrate content is, and you should, if you want to be on a, avoid sugar spikes and things like this, you should pick low GI foods. Well, it turns out that an Israeli group studied this and found that actually what was more important than your GI index of your food was what your microbes were doing. Okay, so for some people, what's good turns out to be bad. So for me, if I have grapes, my blood sugar goes up into the diabetic range of 9.4. If I have bread, I shoot up to about 11 or 12, which is not good. But I can have as much pasta as I like. I can have as much rice as I like. I can drink as much beer or wine as I like. So I'm happy, as long as I don't have too much bread. But I wouldn't know that if I hadn't done my own experiments. And what we're hoping is that we can start to measure people's gut microbes in order to predict which foods they should be preferentially having. So everyone should get some personal nutrition. And we've started this huge study in the UK, in our twins, called the PREDICT study. And we've done 300 twins so far, doing this kind of 2 weeks of food, logging all their foods, looking at their sugars with these glucose monitors that, I've got one on at the moment. You can now wear them for 2 weeks. This shows that one twin spiked when they drank Prosecco, and the other one didn't, and one spiked with rice and the other one didn't. And these are just small life choices that you can make, that if you thought about this regularly, you would know this can make a big difference over years just by changing what your lunch was or what your favorite drink was. It's not like cutting out huge food groups. It's just making small choices that your microbes prefer. I found out that my average lunch at the hospital was tuna sandwiches on bread, I think it's from Marks and Spencer's, for 10 years, because that's what we had in the canteen, and I thought that was healthy. It's got a bit of sweet corn in it. Turns out that was every single time it was giving me a glucose spike, and probably responsible for me gaining 10 kilos over 10 years. If I'd known that now, that I would have been in a much healthier position now. And so just these subtle things of changing what that carbohydrate is can make a huge difference to people's lives. So that's what my particular research is going for in the next 10 years. Now, if all this has failed and you can't work out how to improve, these tablets might be the thing for you. They're frozen poo tablets, and you just have to have about 15 of them and you get a total makeover.
Frozen Poo Tablets is what he just said. He just said frozen Poo Tablets. But you know what? I'd take it. Yeah, I would totally take it to get the microbiome. I haven't, but I would. Something to think about. Don't know. We'll see. Frozen poo. It's coming. You'll see it.
All right. The Americans call them crapsules. They're always very good with the short, snappy phrases. But they're no longer a laughing matter because they are the #1 treatment for a very severe infection now called recurrent Clostridium difficile infection. People who have too many antibiotics get recurrent infections and they can die, and people do die, but this has a 90% success. If you have a poo transplant from someone who's super healthy and you're in this and you're very sick, 90% recovery, which is 3 times better than the nearest current medical treatment. It also works for ulcerative colitis to the same extent as the latest drugs, and it's being tried in a number of other conditions. And so we know very little about it. It's a very crude tool, as you can imagine, in more ways than one. And everybody's different, so clearly we may have to match donors and recipients in ways we hadn't thought about. But they're using it for all kinds of interesting treatments, including treating diabetes and obesity, etc. So watch this space. Finally, just to recap, I think if you can think of your gut microbes with this gardening analogy, you can't go far wrong. It's a key aspect of nutrition. You've got to realize that food is a series of chemicals. It's not carbohydrates, fat, and protein, and calories. Okay, start thinking of these as chemicals that react with other microbes there to produce all these chemical reactions which you need. And everyone needs more fiber. There's certain more polyphenols, more fermented foods. And we need to explore also the reactions with medicines. Everybody reacts differently with medicines as they do with the foods as well. And so none of this is being tested by modern science yet. We haven't caught up. And really there's huge potential for personalized diets. And the one message I want to leave you with is diversity, diversity, diversity. The more you can do that, the better. And realize with 100 trillion microbes inside you, you'll never truly dine alone again. Thank you.
So there you have it. We have some great microbiome information from Dr. Tim Spector. His books are linked down below if you're interested. And it's really one of the presentations that initially got me started down the path of wanting to feed my microbiome for ensuring the long-lasting effect of my weight loss surgery for the long term. Part of my fundamental change with my relationship with food. And I hope you enjoyed this. This is what we're going to be looking at my periodic Saturday science videos, where we take a look at a lot of different science and research and how it might affect us in the bariatric world. So until next time, take care.